Typewriters. Wow. Been a while since we even used a typewriter. I don't know if anyone has used a typewriter. I used to have one at home because my father was a businessman who sometimes worked from home, and we had this old typewriter. And I don't know, the last I saw it was when I was 10 or 12 years old. All right. Unnecessary information. Well, let's go ahead and read the passage. Typewriters are the epitome of a technology, or the epitome is the peak or the perfect representation of a technology that has been completely rendered obsolete. So it is the peak or the perfect example of something that is obsolete or useless in the digital age, right? The ink comes off the ribbon, they weigh a ton, and second thoughts are a disaster. What does he mean by second thoughts are a disaster? Basically, you don't have the backspace key to go back and change text like you have in Word. So if you start typing something and then you change your mind about what to say, then going back and making those changes and striking things out and then retyping it is a problem. Right? So it's describing why typewriters don't work, or the problems, basically. But they are also personal, portable, and above all private. So this is kind of like an advantage that he's now talking about. Above all private, which means this is something that they're giving most importance to. Type a document and lock it away, and more or less the only way anyone else can get it is if you give it to them. Because they're talking about hacking here. If you type something on your computer, you don't have to necessarily be, it doesn't have to be secure. Somebody could hack into your computer and take it away. Whereas with a typewriter, that doesn't happen. That is why the Russians have decided to go back to typewriters in some government offices, so specifically in government offices, right? And why in the US, some departments have never abandoned them. So government offices in Russia and the US still use typewriters because of that inability to hack, which is possible with any digital device. Yet it is not just their resistance to algorithms and secret surveillance that keeps typewriter production lines. Well, one at least, which means there's only one line of typewriters in manufacturing, in business. The last British one closed a year ago. So it's kind of like a side note here. So privacy is not the main, of these three factors of personal, portable, and private, privacy was an important factor. But privacy is not the only factor. Nor is it the nostalgic appeal of the metal body. So nostalgic is like thinking back about the past and feeling good about it, like how I started this passage telling you a story about my father being a businessman and how I remember seeing him working on a typewriter. That's me being nostalgic, right? Thinking about the past and feeling good about it. So nostalgic is one factor, but it's not only nostalgic. It's not the only factor of the metal body and the stout, well-defined keys that make them popular on eBay. A typewriter demands something particular, attentiveness. So now that's our third factor. Privacy is one reason it's popular. Nostalgia is another reason, attentiveness. By the time the paper is loaded, the ribbon is tightened, the carriage returned, the spacing and the margins set, there is a big premium on hitting the right key. So there's so much pre-work that you have to do that you might as well be careful, and there is a value that's placed and you're on being careful. That means sorting out ideas, pulling together a kind of order and organizing details before actually striking off. There can be no thinking on screen with a typewriter because you've done so much work to set up the typewriter. You're not thinking as you go and correcting yourself. You're planning everything out. You're pulling ideas together and you're organizing the details before you even start typing. Nor are there any easy distractions. So distractions is another factor he's now bringing in. So there are no distractions, and that's presented as a good thing, right? No online shopping, no urgent emails, no Twitter, no need even for electricity. Perfect for writing in a remote hideaway. So if you wanted to go away somewhere and write, that's also perfectly possible when you are using a typewriter. The thinking process is accompanied by the encouraging clack of the keys and the ratchet of the carriage return. Ping! Right? I like the ping at the end of the passage. So the author is looking at typewriters positively, even though he starts off by saying that it's basically a technology that has been made obsolete by the digital age. So the whole point of the passage is to explain why typewriters still work. He's talking about privacy for governments, he's talking about nostalgia, and he's also talking about how big the whole process is such a nice process. You spend so much time on it that your thoughts are organized, there are no distractions, and your thinking process is encouraged, right, by the sounds and by the whole setting up of the typewriter process. I feel like the author almost romanticizes typewriters a little bit because of the positive vibe in the passage. It's like looking at it feels like the author is a little bit nostalgic as well, just like me when reading this passage. Let's look at the questions. Which one of the following best describes what the passage is trying to do? And the passage is trying to explain why typewriters still work, right? Which is almost what answer option A pretty much word by word says. It describes why people continue to use typewriters even in the digital age. So that's exactly what I just said, why typewriters still work. So I'm going to hold on to A and then we'll look at the other options. It argues that typewriters will continue to be used even though they are an obsolete technology. Okay. Is he talking about typewriters being used in the present? Yes. Is he saying they will continue to be used in the future? There is no mention of the future anywhere in the passage, so I would question the validity of this option. It highlights the personal benefits of using typewriters. Does it highlight the benefits of using the typewriter? Yes. Does it highlight personal benefits? Not entirely, right? It talks about factors other than personal benefits. Yes, he talks about the thinking process, which you could classify as a personal benefit, but then privacy, for example, in government buildings is not necessarily a personal benefit, right? It's just a reason that people use typewriters. So I'm questioning C. Will hold on to it for the moment. I highly doubt it's the answer. It shows that computers offer fewer options than typewriters. It's not a comparison between computers and typewriters explicitly. We talk about computers only to show what benefits you get from typewriters or how typewriters are different rather than fewer or greater number of options. It is not about the number of options. So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate D. So it comes down to A, describes why people use typewriters even in the digital age, which could be for any reason whatsoever. It highlights the personal benefits of using typewriters, which is a slightly narrower option because it specifically says personal. And that is why we just talked about it before we started this passage. And you need to, when you're choosing between two options and you're looking at best describes or main idea kind of passage, you need to look at what's the scope of the passage. And you need to look at which one best summarizes the discussion here, and A does more than C. Because C rules out things like privacy in government buildings. And that is why A is the best option. I'm glad that we talked about there was a question about choosing between two options, and we talked about looking for an option that best summarizes the discussion before we did this passage. I completely forgot this question was there and that we were going to do it right after. But I'm glad we had that discussion because this question can be a prime example of how you make that choice and how you look at the scope, how you look at whether it best summarizes the information. And you realize that you have to pay attention to the words in your answer options. When you're reading a passage, and you don't understand a word or you don't read every word, you might still be okay with it. But if when you're reading your answer options, you need to be way more careful than when you're reading the passage itself. According to the passage, some governments still use typewriters because specifically about governments, it is about hacking and surveillance and safety and security. So you want an option that talks about that. They do not want to abandon old technologies that may be useful in the future. Again, we have not talked about the future. We're not talking about usefulness. So I'm going to eliminate that. They want to ensure that typewriter production lines remain in business. There's one production line in business. They're not trying to save the business empire. So that's out. They like the nostalgic appeal. That's people who buy it on eBay. That's not necessarily the government. So I'm going to rule it out. They can control who reads the document. Absolutely. That's about security and safety. And clearly D is your answer. We've talked about different reasons for different people. For the government, it's all about privacy and safety and security. And the only option that even hints at that is D. None of the other options even touch on privacy issues. That I would say is a super straightforward question. We can move on to question number 3. The writer praises typewriters for all of the following reasons except. So we talked about how he's talking about the positive aspects towards the end. So it helps you think. It helps you be organized. There's a nostalgic appeal to it. So we'll look at 4 options that say that. It's an except question. So we're looking at 3 true options and then we'll eliminate them. Unlike computers, they can only be used for typing. Yes, he absolutely says that. No online shopping, no Twitter. That's stated in the passage, so you don't have any distractions, and he's seeing that as a good thing. You cannot revise what you have typed on a typewriter, absolutely, because this is the organization part of it. And this is the distraction part of it. Typewriters are noisier than computers. It is presented as a positive thing in the last sentence when he says, the thinking process is accompanied by the encouraging clack of keys. So the sound of the keys is actually encouraging. So that's a good thing because it helps the thinking process. So they are noisier and the noise helps you think. So C is also given in the passage. Typewriters are messier to use than computers. Messiness is mentioned in the passage in the second sentence when it says the ink comes off the ribbon. That could be potentially a messy thing, but that is when he was talking about the disadvantages of using the typewriter and why it is now obsolete. It is not an advantage, and the question is asking you for why the writer praises typewriters, and therefore your answer will have to be D.